Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And I want to move on to... do you know, if I said to you, fox hunting, the death penalty and abortion, what would you say to me? All right. I'll try again. What do you think fox hunting, the death penalty and abortion have in common? No? No, I'll give you another clue. In the context of our time together in 2019, what makes fox hunting, abortion and the death penalty really interesting? God, blimey, if you want a job doing, you have to do it yourself, don't you? All right. They were hardy perennials of public debate 20 years ago. You would not be able to do a job like this without talking about one or other of them almost every day. We still occasionally do a little bit on fox hunting, but not in anything like the way that it would have been done prior to the ban coming in. The death penalty, fox hunting. When I was a public school boy debater, really, which is 30 years ago, these were the subjects that would come up with unerring regularity. And if you're, oddly, thinking back, it's pre-immigration, because if you're doing a debate show for telly or for media now, the subjects that they always say, oh, we thought we might start with immigration, at which point I always say, I'm afraid you're going to have to find another presenter. Because I've been there a million times and no one's that desperate to see my fizzog on the box. But it used to be fox hunting, the death penalty and abortion. Occasionally homosexuality might have crept in, and obviously we're all going backwards as a society at the moment when it comes to bigotries and prejudices, but we still haven't gone that far back yet that anyone's suggesting we should recriminalise homosexuality. Oh man, I said it out loud. Someone's going to send me a link now. There's going to be some far-right politician, isn't there, somewhere claiming that we should recriminalise homosexuality. He's probably been invited to the White House for tea. But anyway, until you send me those links, I will pause. Talking about the decision in Alabama, in America, to recriminalise abortion in pretty much every case. I think there's a dispensation if women are in danger of losing their own lives by proceeding with the pregnancy. But if you've been raped by your own father, you should be compelled by law to pursue the pregnancy, something which I think Jacob Rees-Mogg believes, doesn't he? He certainly thinks that you should be compelled by morality and religion to go through with a pregnancy in the event of you being raped by your own father or stepfather. And I mention that because it's very easy to think, oh, those flipping Americans in the Deep South, those rednecks, those weirdos. People in Parliament have very similar beliefs. And people in Northern Ireland have to live by very similar laws, something that may come as a bit of a shock to you. The law in Northern Ireland is pretty much identical to what has just been passed in Alabama. And I mean, it pains me that I still have to point this out. An awful lot of the Brexit madness is built upon the claim from the DUP that they should not in Northern Ireland be compelled to follow different laws from the rest of the UK mainland. It's why the European Union had to bow to our desire to see the so-called customs union extended to the whole of the United Kingdom rather than confined, as they originally wished and intended, to the island of Ireland. So the DUP turned around and said, no, we can't possibly countenance that because people on the mainland would be living by different laws from people in the in Northern Ireland, without mentioning the fact that they categorically and deliberately enact very, very different laws regarding abortion than those of us living on the mainland have to follow, which is just, I think, a point of interest, let alone a point of contention. And here's what I'd like to talk about. Here's where I want your help. And I think, slightly worryingly, the first four calls on the screen are all men. Jamal, Stephen, David and Mike all think that they should be at the front of the queue to talk about women's autonomy and biological independence. I am also a man, so that's the full set. That's all five of us thinking that you must listen to what we think about women's freedom, because we're men. And that's the problem here. The bit I don't get, and I wonder whether you have to be a woman to properly live this understanding as opposed to merely appreciate it. The bit I don't get is the why. So if you are persuaded somehow that human life truly begins at the moment of conception, and I have to tell you that the bill, as I've read it from Alabama, doesn't even do that, because if you have a fertilized egg in a laboratory awaiting implantation as part of IVF treatment, they're fine with that. It's just the pregnant woman who wants to terminate her pregnancy that they seem to have a problem with. That's the beginning of an answer to the question that I posed originally, isn't it? Because a pregnant woman who wants to terminate her pregnancy is a minority. So when I talk about the subjugation and the oppression of women and say, I get it with the skin colour, I get it with the sexuality, I get it with the ethnicity or the religion, I get how you demonise, you other a minority, you suppress them in order to make your following feel somehow superior or better about themselves. How does that work with women? Answer, you could turn a woman against a woman who's pregnant and doesn't want to continue with her pregnancy, because you make her feel better than that woman. So that perhaps is part of the answer, isn't it? It is a minority. Pregnant women who want to terminate their pregnancy are a minority. But if you're a far-right politician, you don't give a sugar about refugee children. You sit in the House of Commons or the Alabama Senate and you vote categorically to shut our doors to children fleeing famine or warfare. In fact, if you support Donald Trump, you're in favour of these children being ripped from their mother's arms and locked up in cages. So where does the human life argument come into the far-right view on this? And I apologise if you're a devout Catholic who devotes as much time to looking after poor children and refugees as you do to campaigning for abortion legislation to be reversed in this country, because you at least have the moral consistency. I'm not talking about you today. I disagree with you, but not with anything like the vim and vigour that I disagree with people who claim that they're anti-abortion because they care about human life and then vote routinely and campaign to build walls and shut gates and close borders over which desperate human life would travel. How can you care more about a collection of cells that you choose to describe as an unborn child than you do about a living, breathing child trying to cross the Mediterranean in a rubber dinghy? The short answer is you can't. You're a lying fraud. My job, of course, is to drive that point home remorselessly. Unless you think I'm wrong, in which case 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I will talk to men about this because it's a philosophical question about fascism. It's not just a question about female autonomy and independence, but that's the question that I want. Given that fascism always involves seeing some forms of human life as inferior to another, people like us, folk. They always use the word folk. It's always about trying to cast the Romanians that you don't want to live next door to, or the foreigners speaking different languages on trains without mentioning that my children speak German at home. All fascism seeks to cast followers as in some way superior to others. So where does abortion legislation come into that? Why does it always follow fast upon calls for the kind of politics that we're seeing on both sides of the Atlantic now? And the question is, I mean, I'm going to stand by it, but of course it could evolve and morph slightly in the course of our contemplations. Why does abortion always go hand in hand with far-right politics? 0345 6060 973. And please don't hold back from ringing in on the grounds that you think your answer is blindingly obvious. I'm a man who was raised a Catholic. I argued passionately against abortion until the age of 15 or 16, when, for reasons that I'm sure I don't go into, I suddenly realised how easy it was for 16-year-old girls to think they got pregnant, and how absurd it would be for me as a man to tell them what they could or couldn't do as a consequence of that. And it was, I mean, genuinely like the clouds parting and the sun coming out. But I make no apology for that. It was the environment I was raised in. And also, as an adopted child, an adopted baby, I was always very conscious that if the current legislation in Northern Ireland had been in place in England when I was conceived, when I was born, I wouldn't be here today. If abortion had been a lot easier, if abortion had been as easy as it is now in Ireland back then, I don't know about my biological mother's religion or moral convictions, but my goodness me, the likelihood of all of those young women from Ireland who came here to give up babies for adoption, the likelihood of them all deciding that they would continue to come here to give up babies for adoption instead of going through a termination, I mean, it's absurd. So as a younger person, I used to take it very personally. And I always used to destroy the other side in these arguments. I used to get wheeled all around the country by the monks to have debates in other schools about abortion. And because I'd stand up and do that line about, if abortion was easy in 1972, I wouldn't be here today. I mean, in retrospect, I don't think you'd have to be that unpleasant to suggest that might be an argument in favour of changing the abortion laws. But luckily, we didn't live in such callous times back then. And then I changed. So I get the religious bit up to a point. It's the same reason why until relatively recently the Catholic Church would not let divorced people get married, or contraception was considered to be sinful. I get all of that. I get the religious bit. It's all about building the flock, isn't it? Building the following. But the far right bit, why does abortion legislation, why does abortion restriction always go hand in hand with far right politics? I genuinely don't quite get it. And by, I don't know, about 12:30 today, I intend to. Let's start with Carol, who's in Lewisham. The phone lines are open. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Carol, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
I think I'm actually about to just repeat everything that you've said. I was also brought up Catholic. I was adopted.
Good grief, really?
My own birth mother gave me up for adoption at age 18. I had a wonderful childhood, wonderful parents, wonderful
sorry,
family.
she was 18. God, I'm a bit thick sometimes.
She was 18.
Yes, you were a baby. You were a baby.
Yeah,
What do you mean she gave you up for adoption when you were 18? I've never heard that before. If Jeremy Kyle was still on telly, that would be the kind of story he'd love to hear from. But no, she was 18. No. You were a bambini.
I was a bambini.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I was brought up with my whole life, my mom telling me, you know, we're so grateful for the sacrifice that your mother made to give you up because she couldn't give you the life that we had. And as a result, grew up really with a sort of deep belief in the sanctity of life from conception.
Yes.
Now, as I grew older, grew agnostic, moved into atheism, started seeing the world in a slightly different light, I now am a vehement proponent for bodily integrity of women's rights, and I believe that fundamentally and really, really, really strongly. However, I think you and I have landed on different sides of the argument. I don't still wrap up, if you're in favour of abortion, you must be this far right.
No, nor do I. I said, I mean, I certainly wasn't far right when I was a 16-year-old debating champion. I was just a sort of slightly unquestioning Catholic.
Sure. And so, you know, we're on the same page there. Yes. And then I look at my mother and I look at my grandmother and I look at my aunts and people like that, and they still have those views. I'm so glad that you brought up the Northern Ireland question, because what's happening in Alabama, that's not us. We can't do anything about that. But the UK, we have a different set of values here, and the idea that we can, on the one hand, be having this absurd debate about where the line is drawn for Brexit and keeping the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland united, but still allow for women to have to go through absolute trauma if they have pregnancies that they don't want to continue, and face prosecution if they come to the mainland. It's just, I mean, it's horrific, and I can't believe we're not talking about it more. I think one of the reasons...
Well, we don't talk about any Northern Irish issues as much as we should do, partly because they're complicated and partly because it's hard to persuade people to care until something like Brexit comes along and draws them into very, very stark relief.
Well, I think BPAS has been talking about it for a while.
Yes, you're right, the British Pregnancy Advisory Service.
Yeah, it hasn't, it's sort of fallen a little bit on deaf ears, because we've managed to, through hook or by crook, we don't have abortion on demand as law in this country, but we have... Women have the ability to get it should they need it through signing off with GPs and everything else. And we sort of let that slide instead of making the impassioned argument consistently that a person should have the right to their own body. If we take the word woman out of it, a person, any person should have a right to their own body and that sanctity.
Mate, if men could get pregnant, they'd sell abortion pills next to the tills in Budgeon.
Sure. Now, on the flip side of that, and I think it's important. I mean, I know you spend a lot of your time trying to find the middle ground and trying to persuade people, and instead of sort of putting people into two separate camps, realise there's this middle ground of people who find these issues complex.
Yes. Yes, well, and also there'll be plenty of people who are massive racists and homophobes but aren't actually anti-abortion. Maybe I should have done more to make them feel welcome on the programme today. They could sort of step out of their mum's back bedroom and actually ring in for once. So can I do that? I don't know. Am I being too irresponsible? I don't think so. Carol, that was a lovely start. If you're generally quite far right, like, you know, massive racist, Islamophobe, homophobe, all the usual, all the tickets, you pretend you don't like people speaking foreign on trains, or you like that Breaking Point poster all that kind of stuff, but you are outraged by the idea that women shouldn't be allowed to have abortions. Where do you fit into this debate? 0345 6060 973. Don't forget that we've got a president in America who's kind of facilitating and encouraging this lurch to the right, but he also boasts about how he sexually assaults women. So, in a way, that sums up part of the answer to my question. I want to create a world where I can rape women and they have to go through with the pregnancy. And oddly, people alive now lived in that world. And needless to say, I was half joking when I said you will now send me clips of people in British politics calling for homosexuality to be recriminalised, and lo and behold, a couple of DUP figures from Northern Ireland have done either precisely that or very close to it. The one lesson I've learned in the last few years is that no change is permanent. No progress is permanent. It can all be reversed. The shock for me of the last few years is how many people seem to want that reverse to happen. And the one area I struggle to understand why is ideologically very far-right people who are anti-body autonomy, are anti-abortion. Hugh is in Bloomsbury. Hugh, what would you like to say?
Well, unfortunately, James, I'm not far-right, so I don't really fulfil that part of your question.
That's what they all say.
But I have studied the far right, or
I'm just a patriot. I'm just a patriot. I'm teasing you. I know you're not going down that road. In fact, I suspect someone who's studied it understands it rather better than somebody who subscribes to it. So do fill us in.
Well, I certainly wouldn't claim to be an expert, but I have read up on it a bit for my degree.
Okay.
So there's this idea, basically, in nationalism that obviously the nation is the single monolithic unit that needs to be preserved. And within that unit, you have men and women. Men, in this case, are agents. So, you know, if you see propaganda posters, it's always guys with big arms, you know, carrying hammers or guns or whatever it is. National service is almost always for men. And women in this scenario are symbols. So Britannia, the motherland, the birth of the nation, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the idea that the symbol of the nation would seek to destroy, in their conception, the next generation of agents of the nation is anathema to the idea that the nation needs to survive, that the nation needs to be competitive as regards other nations.
Have we got any evidence of far right? I mean, all of the senators in Alabama are white men. Have we got any evidence of people having slightly different attitudes towards abortion depending on the ethnicity of the woman involved, the pregnant woman? Because that would fit your analysis perfectly, wouldn't it?
Well, I dare say it wouldn't help if the woman were black in a homogeneously white country, for instance.
Yes.
But I couldn't name you one off the top of my head.
But actually, if you're a massive racist, you don't want a little black baby coming into the world. And if you're a massive misogynist stroke nationalist, you don't want a woman being able to kill a little white baby. So you can actually square both of those circles quite easy. God, it's easy to be a fascist, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in the case of not wanting to have a little black baby in the world, what is anathema isn't necessarily the abortion.
No,
it's the fact that the woman is pregnant in the first place.
Precisely.
Because that means that she needs to have had sex with a black man.
Unless I own her, in which case I'm all for it, and I wouldn't let her have an abortion because I'll also own her baby. And again, that's pretty close to being in living memory in America.
Yeah, well, I mean, all over the world, and still happens in some...
That was just, we're
places,
talking about Alabama today, which, of course, would have a particular resonance in this case. And so that explains why you can claim to care passionately about human life when talking about a collection of cells you have decided is a human life, as opposed to a refugee child drowning in the Mediterranean who is categorically, inarguably a human life, but who you would vote and agitate to leave drowning in the sea, because it's like all fascism. It's about applying more value to somebody like you than to somebody not like you. So you can't abort a baby that might grow up to be like me, but you can let a child with brown skin drown in the sea, because however old they get, they're never going to be a white Anglo-Saxon male like me.
Well, exactly. That's the implicit thing in saying, you know, this is a human fetus or whatever it is as soon as it's conceived.
Then let's just remove colour from the equation, because, of course, this is the kind of law that presumably the Taliban or exponents of Sharia law would also love. So it's a sort of different form of nationalism or religious fundamentalism, which also says you can't terminate a pregnancy that might lead to a life which would be part of our flock rather than our ethnicity. You're very good, mate.
Well, thank you very much. It doesn't actually matter what the particular components of that group is, as long as the group is considered to be homogenous or is considered to be, a monolithic whole by the members of that group.
Of course.
Then it doesn't matter whether that group is, brown,
but then the unborn
white,
life the unborn life, as they choose to term it, is worth more than the born life of the mother in a way. Or at least the agency of the mother, not the actual life. So, no, we definitely want her to stay alive. We just don't want her to have control over her own womb. Oh, crikey. What stage are your studies at, Hugh?
Sorry?
What stage are your studies at, or is this a retrospective recall of your degree?
Well, I'm still doing it. I've just started writing my dissertation for my MA at UCL.
Fantastic. Well, I wish you luck. Feel free to put a quote from me on the front cover saying Hugh is a very bright lad. I'm going to spend a couple of moments today reminding you and encouraging you to go and sign the petition for Martin's Law. Fegan Murray, the mother of Martin Hett, who was murdered in the terror attack at the Manchester Arena, seeking to improve security at all such venues in the country. It should be the biggest no-brainer of all, shouldn't it? But only just gone through the 15,000 level. Let's see if we can get it up between us to 100,000. And we won't be claiming the credit, because the Manchester Evening News have thrown the weight of their support behind it as well. But you can do it right now in 2 minutes. Quite a few of you have texted me to say, make sure people know how easy it is. So either Google search for Martin's Law, or just go to my Twitter account and see the link to the Manchester Evening News story, or go to Fegan's and see the link from there. It's just such an obvious thing to do, and I think we can all agree now that we seem to have ended up living in an era where nobody does anything unless they feel compelled or conditioned to do it. Never just do it because it's right. 11:53 is the time. Stephen is in Stockwell. Back to I'm getting a much clearer picture on it. I thought the last fellow was bang on the money. It certainly made perfect sense to me. Although I have to tell you, and I don't know whether this is problematical or not, if I run through the names on my screen at the moment, I've got a Nick, 2 Stephens, a Simon, a David, and a Stu. I've also got a Bryony and a Sue. But men offering their opinion... No, that's me being an idiot. I'll take that back, because I thought the last fellow demonstrated this is an academic inquiry into why far-right ideology so often encompasses anti-abortion attitudes, while simultaneously considering actual human lives of people with different ethnicities or sexualities or religions to be worthy of precisely no protection whatsoever. So it's not humans that anti-abortionists are keen to protect. It's humans that might exist one day and be like me. Stephen's in Stockwell. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Your caller before was just so spot on the academic and the historic side from white supremacy.
Yes, although remember, I brought in Sharia law and the Taliban as well, because this is not a white issue. It's an extremist issue. Yes.
I want to go into the deep issue, or the longer historical issue based on religion. And these old religious laws, and what a lot of people don't understand, these laws were created for mostly nomadic people who really need to have population growth.
Yes. And so they'd have a problem with homosexuals because they'd be, getting action that was never going to lead to a child, and they'd have a problem with terminations or abortions, although because that, again, would shrink the flock, shrink the herd.
Exactly. So they tie that into white supremacy and eugenics. I don't know if you've ever read the book Man in the High Castle, or you ever watched the show. It's based all around the same thing about eugenics and Nazism and keeping the race pure and not having any disabled children in your family or any hereditary diseases. And these people tend to, when they found out that they have those forms of disease, they're put to death. And because they just see it as you being weak. And you find that white supremacists today, they feel very obliged to attack disabled people and mock them. And you see that from time to time. So all this ties into...
It does go hand in hand. In 1943, Nazi Germany, the penalties for abortion were increased again. Thanks to Emma for sending this in. Providing an abortion to an Aryan woman became a capital offence, but abortion was permitted if the fetus was deformed or disabled.
And one of the Alabama laws that you probably didn't mention is they're threatening doctors 99-year imprisonment.
They are. I didn't mention that. You're right. I forgot. But that is the penalty for any doctor found to have provided an abortion to a pregnant woman is a 99-year prison sentence.
It's not only Alabama. There are a couple other states that are restricting abortion laws in America, and it's really a dangerous thing. Where it's going, where I see it's going is maybe if this could, if they get away with this.
Well, that's the plan. I mean, the bill is so sweeping and extreme. It's clearly designed to go to the Supreme Court, and in the hope of overturning Roe versus Wade, which is something that becomes easier given the personnel that Donald Trump has slotted into place. But you and I talk about this, and understandably we feel aggrieved and offended, quite profoundly disgusted. Why aren't we talking about Northern Ireland every day? Why do we have to wait until Alabama does this? It's trending on Twitter. You've got it, up and down the social media, and yet as a couple of prominent female journalists have reminded us, and indeed as BPAS, the British Pregnancy Advisory Service, have reminded us this morning, it happens in Northern Ireland. Women in Northern Ireland can't access legal abortion freely.
A lot of this has to do with closed society and how these societies are being developed and changed. And you find a lot of these societies, they don't want their culture to change or the landscape to change in any way where you find other races are coming in. They're against interracial relationships, all those stuff. And it's about keeping their gene pure. And, some people might agree with that, but...
And it is yet another. It's another example, isn't it, where the Islamist fundamentalist and the so-called far right white supremacist are actually on exactly the same page. If only they were all blind and couldn't see each other's skin colour, they'd all be in the same team, and the rest of us could get on with being excellent to each other.
One of the biggest ignorance that I notice in the world is how we view ourselves as a part of this planet. When you look at all the different species of animals and insects and reptiles and plants, we see, a lot of human beings, we don't see ourselves as that connection, that this planet has a variety of species of life to survive on it. And we see race and different races as individuals. We don't see ourselves as a collective human being.
Oh, well, the human race. I guess the very existence of the word racism plays part in that process.
We don't see ourselves as that. At the end of the day, we have to live on this planet. There's no other planet we have to go on. None.
Beautifully put. Absolutely beautifully put. And the question, of course, that hangs above all of this has probably been answered now. How can you claim to be concerned about the sanctity of human life when you're talking about a matter of opinion on whether it is a life or not, but not care about refugees? Or you can vote, you can call food banks uplifting. Or you can vote against any economic policies that would improve the lot of the poorest, while simultaneously A, claiming to be a Christian, and B, believing that women who've been raped by their own fathers should be forced by law to go through with the pregnancy. What's the answer to that question? In a fascistic context, the answer is, well, you must be contributing to the nationalist surge and urge, to which Stephen's response, quite rightly, is, well, the opposite of nationalism is humanitarianism. None of us are nations. None of us are nations. But we're all humans. PMQs is underway. Theresa May addressing Jeremy Corbyn across the dispatch box. Theo Ushwood is hopefully, I forgot to check this morning, but Theo Ushwood is hopefully keeping an eye on PMQ so that he can bring you up to date with developments at 12:45. I'm inundated with people keen to talk about the abortion conversation, the abortion questions that we're having. I'd kind of forgotten about PMQ, so we've only got 45 minutes left, so we'll probably just crack on with this and squeeze in some of the other stuff that we were going to talk about tomorrow. I'll tell you who I'm desperate to talk to. Have you seen the story about Richer Sounds, the guy that set up Richer Sounds, Julian Richer? How many times back in the days before Brexit broke everything did we sit here wondering why there couldn't be more companies like John Lewis, where the profits got shared out among the staff? You see that the average FTSE 100 chief exec now earns 125 times the average salary. This is one of the biggest gaps that's grown in the course of our time together, actually. And make it sound like a marriage. And we've often wondered, why don't more businesses do what John Lewis did back in the day? I presume his sons were quite upset about it. I think he had a couple of sons, and they got told at some point, I'm not leaving you the business, I'm leaving it to the staff. And the fellow that set up Richer Sounds has just done something very similar. So it is doable, and it is possible. And I remember when Richer Sounds was set up, I had an identical haircut to the fellow that set it up. It was a ponytail. He's still got all his hair. I don't know why that resonated with me particularly, but we'll probably have a look at that story tomorrow, hopefully with Julian's help. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. This relationship between fundamentalist or supremacist ideologies, whether it's white or Islamist, and abortion, it's gone in very unexpected directions. Fascinating for me, by the simple observation that the presumption I had was to do more with misogyny. We haven't explored that avenue yet, so let's open that up. I'm afraid, a very, very late arrival at the fertility as maniacal school of thought, the way that a woman's biology actually enslaved her to men. So if a man can... Look, the first platform of misogyny, of woman hatred, by men who aren't actually gay, actual genuine misogynists, as opposed to repressed homosexuals taking out their fury at themselves on anyone near them, especially women. The first platform of misogyny, I think, is the fact that generally, particularly when they're young, men are pretty horny almost all the time. And they only get to have sex when a woman consents. And presumably among men who aren't very good at talking to women, who aren't very nice, that becomes an enormously humiliating and frustrating reality. I do have a little line in my book about so-called involuntary celibates. Should put a little bit more effort into personal hygiene, grooming, general friendliness, charm, and being nice, rather than into spending hours online in a dark room furiously raging against the monstrous tyranny of women. But it's a bit late for that for most of them. The point is, that's where it comes from. This is entirely my own theory. I'm sure cleverer people than me have explored it and expanded it further and quite possibly rejected it. But when I find myself wondering, even a friend of mine who's quite promiscuous, who doesn't really like women, and I've never been able to work out why, the nearest I've come to an answer is that. Why should I only get to have sex when a woman consents? So that allows you to just sow the seed of woman hatred, okay? Then, of course, you contemplate the possibility, well, if she's not allowed to have an abortion, and if she's my wife, then by law I can have sex with her whenever I want. Because until the 1980s, even in these enlightened islands, we had politicians in the House of Lords arguing that it's impossible. How could you possibly rape your wife? Again, I think that legislation, or I think that's quoted in my book. I should stop mentioning my book for a couple of weeks. The paperback's out in a fortnight. I'll go all in again then. But it's just because it's in the forefront of my mind. It's the last time I got stuck into some really rigorous research. So you had people in the House of Lords saying you can't really rape your wife. You couple that legislation with the fact that you can't have an abortion. You then bring in historic Catholic opposition to contraception, and I presume other religions, patriarchal religions, have a problem with contraception as well, for the reasons that Stephen touched on. They might have their roots in nomadic tribes, and that you want as many people in your tribe as possible. Then you create a triangle of fascistic behaviour, regardless of ethnicity, religion, or colour. You can have, the man is in such complete control of proceedings, he can have sex whenever he wants. The woman cannot terminate a pregnancy, so she remains enslaved to him throughout, because not only does she have to worry about feeding herself, she then has to worry about feeding a baby. And she is either breeding or feeding babies. If you look at the infant mortality rates for the 19th century, and of course for parts of the developing world even now, mothers routinely give birth to 12, 13, 14 babies because only a proportion of them will survive. That's the model of humanity that we lived by for millennia. It's only the relatively recent arrival of civilization that has rescued women from that treadmill of breeding and feeding. and also being the property of their menfolk. So all of this actually is, whether they realise it or not, attractive to men who want to go back to that kind of model, which men like me can't ever really understand, in the same way you can never really get your head around racism unless you've been inculcated it, not in its basest form, unless it's been somehow injected into your bloodstream by your parents when you were young. How could you ever look at somebody and think, well, I don't like you because you're a bit darker than me, or I don't like you because you're a bit lighter than me? Oh, I don't like you, you're a bit of a woman. Bryony is a woman, and she's in London Bridge. Bryony, what would you like to say?
Yes, hello. I would like to join in this conversation. I worked at Planned Parenthood in the United States for a long time, and I would like to just say that abortion is as old as conception is.
Yes.
If you make abortion illegal, there is no doubt that people will seek an abortion illegally, and they will be opened up to all kinds of exploitation and
danger,
medical malpractice and danger. And that happens in every community around the world where abortion is illegal.
Including this one. Backstreet
yes,
abortionists
exactly.
were commonplace in the 60s, weren't they? 50s.
Exactly. And that will happen again. And what I say to all the ladies in Alabama is, if you happen to be married to one of these legislators, I would just stop having sex with them.
I've heard
until
about this.
they can
Let me get
see
you the name.
light.
This has been suggested also by Alyssa Milano. I don't know if
Yes.
you knew this, the actress and
Yes, I
the
did.
Me
Yes.
Too activist. Now,
Yes.
can I have a clumsy attempt as a bloke to address that question?
Yes, you can. Yes, absolutely.
Doesn't it enforce and endorse what I just said about a lot of misogyny stemming from the fact that men can only have sex when women let them?
Well, you're talking about a particular small group of men.
That's true.
We're talking about people in the legislature.
Yes.
We're not talking about masses of people.
No.
And if these people in the legislature are so concerned about women getting pregnant and not concerned about all the other problems that are going on in America, as in all the people who have no medical insurance, all the people who are in Alabama particularly who have no work, then I think those men actually deserve a bit of their own medicine.
Yes, I mean, it might not be much of a sacrifice for the women involved.
Well, you don't know.
No, I
Women
don't.
have
I'm
things
just
too, but,
speculating out loud. And one of the funniest things to emerge on social media in the aftermath of the mooted sex ban was an astonishing number of accounts, and I checked, they appeared to be real. Men saying, I've never met a heterosexual woman who enjoyed sex. And you find yourself reading that and thinking, oh, mate, come on. You're supposed to be against public ownership. You've just owned yourself in public. Quite incredible, isn't it?
I know, it's incredible.
And then you have the list of Republicans who've been caught out by their own hypocrisy. A chap called Tim Murphy resigned last year after it was revealed that he'd urged his own mistress to consider an abortion. There's an RNC deputy finance chairman who gave $1.5 million to a Playboy playmate he had an affair with after she aborted his child. There's a Tennessee congressman who supported his ex-wife's decision to get 2 abortions. They all publicly agitate for anti-abortion legislation, but privately, when presented with the reality of the situation in the context of their own lives, they change their tune immediately.
Exactly. And I think it all started... Well, a lot of it started with George Bush, the second George Bush, when he came in, because the first thing he did, the first day, was to cut funds to International Planned Parenthood, the first day he was in office. And
is that right?
that sort of set, and
that is, again, you look at Donald Trump and how anybody who calls themselves a Christian could be anything other than repulsed completely by Donald Trump. The answer is that the word Christianity means nothing in these contexts except self-interest. And the support of the evangelical Christian lobby, which is powerful and incredibly wealthy, goes towards explaining why George W. Bush would do that. It's a bone that you throw to the evangelical Christian lobby, presumably in return for votes and money.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the people who are caught in the middle of this are some of the most underserved people, in particularly in Alabama.
Yes, it looks
and
that
it's
way.
also illegal to take someone across state lines to get an abortion. So even if somebody wanted to help somebody to go somewhere else, it's very difficult, particularly down in those states, to even find any places that medical care, low-cost gynecological medical care is available.
Yes, and I mean, if you had to give a one-sentence answer to the question of why men want to do this. What would you say? You haven't actually touched on
Power.
that. Well, thank you. It's not even a sentence. Of course it is. It's just power. Power for insecure people. I'm fascinated by this relationship because I just don't get it. It's not proper power. I don't want to start quoting Jennifer Rush, but the power of love is worth a hell of a lot more than the power to tell your women folk what they can and can't do in the context of their own bodies. But I guess it's horses for courses. Bryony, what a lovely call. Thank you. 12:15. Oh, he sounds so cheerful, that fella. I think we should all try to follow his example. 18 minutes after 12 is the time. PMQ's on the way. I'm hearing reports that Jeremy Corbyn started singing. So don't miss that. I might instruct Theo Usherwood to emulate Jeremy Corbyn's dulcet tones, if indeed it's true that he has started singing during PMQs. Whip Crack Away, apparently, is the song that he's gone for. In the current climate, I find absolutely everything believable. If you told me that Theresa May had turned up PMQs dressed as Mr. Blobby and hit Mr. Corbyn over the head with a mouldy cucumber, I would probably give that the benefit of the doubt as well. It's no madder than trying to put the withdrawal agreement in front of the Commons again next month. Or arguably, it's slightly less. Back to this curious relationship. I haven't quite nailed it, although I thought Bryony was incredibly astute and illuminating. Sometimes the simplest things can be the hardest to see. Why do men do this? Power. And no man's ever going to admit it, are they? It's why there's this long list of right-wing politicians who've been campaigning publicly for abortion to be recriminalised, and then privately they've been urging their wives and mistresses to go for abortions when it suits them. So no man is going to stand up publicly and say, I'm secretly terrified of women and deeply resentful of the fact that if I ever want to have sex, I either have to pay for it or change my personality or get married to someone who I don't really like, but they're as unpleasant and as twisted as I am, so any port in a storm. No man's ever going to stand up and say that. So what does he stand up and say instead? I believe in the sanctity of human life. Okay, can we let that refugee child in over there? No. Well, what human life do you believe in the sanctity of? Unborn ones. Well, it's a lot easier to look after born ones. Fake news. But presumably we're close to cracking this particular nut, but I could do with a little bit more pressure being exerted upon the cracks. Kate's in Tooting. Kate, exert some pressure on the cracks.
Hello, Jane.
Hello,
I completely agree with Brian, I think it was, about power. That's the word I was going to use.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting when you're talking at the top of the conversation about women not being a minority, because obviously, logically, women are not a minority, but actually they are treated often like a minority. In the work I'm in the arts, often there'll be a call out to minority people to apply, and women are included in that group. So I think there is a sense, and it's interesting. You think with the arts.
So I don't know what you've done with your phone. It's gone all a bit noisy. If we can sort that out, I don't know if you've moved location or something. It's never anyone's fault. It happens for a whole variety of reasons. I'll waffle for about 5 seconds. If Kate doesn't come back, I'll head over to Stephen, who's in Barnet. But the question about, sorry, Kate, where were we? You were saying that women are treated and perceived as a minority, even though statistically they're not, and that resonates with me the more I think about it.
And are often othered. And I think in terms of the more kind of right wing, the further down you get towards the kind of more fascistic end of things, for me, it would be the terror of losing that power, losing that position and that entitled sense of power.
Yes.
And any other coming along is potentially a threat to that. So therefore, you have to find a way to keep that other disempowered. And I think it's interesting that as women's rights, LGBT rights, all of these things are starting to rise up more, you then get the counter-rise of the people trying to push that other back down, because the fragility, the ultimate fragility, I think you used the word insecurity, underneath the perceived power, I think is quite great. So the greater the insecurity, the greater the need to assert your power. And so keeping a woman, often young women, potentially, horrifically may have been raped, incest, whatever, are going to then be wholly dependent on potentially other dysfunctional people who are in their circle or on the state.
Yes.
Their life is immediately started from a disempowered place. And as you say, they're not therefore going to take any notice of this poor child that's brought into a complete mess.
I think Alabama also has the death penalty in place as well, so the sanctity of human life is clearly negotiable.
And the religious element, I'm sure there are some people from a very deep religious faith that believe in this, but it's also a completely, it's a very useful smokescreen for people that just want to assert their own particular power. What you said about Trump completely resonated. You say, I want the right to rape.
Yes.
And I want the right to force you to have
that baby.
a child.
Yeah.
And that is power. That is not for me about the sanctity of human life. That is about saying
it's all about power. And but I mean the same would apply to Sharia law or Taliban style ideologies. It's all about subjugating women, seeing women as property, which was, I mean, a matter of fact in this country. Not quite in living memory, but you know, certainly in the 19th century, and we are seeing people. I think one of them's even publishing a book about how great the Victorians were. They're desperate to go back to those days. It's quite bizarre. Can I say something to you without you biting my head off?
Yes.
As the father of daughters, I cannot understand how a father of daughters would be in favour of any of this. There was a presenter on this radio station many years ago, a female presenter. We were talking about date rape. And I will never forget her saying, "Oh, if my daughter got drunk and then got raped as a result, I'd just give her a hug. I wouldn't tell her to go to the police." It was the single most shocking thing I've ever heard on the radio. Partly because it was from a woman, but when I see men saying that a woman who's been raped shouldn't be able to get an abortion, as a father of daughters, I don't know what planet they inhabit.
Yeah, but James, because you have a different attitude towards women. So they are men who have daughters but have a specific attitude towards women, and however much they love their daughters are still within that system that they want to uphold.
Oh, I suppose.
And I think
so are their wives. So are their wives then.
And so, this I was just about to say. I think, I was going to say, in terms of the system we live in, often we're not aware to the degree to which that system exists. So we all have to look at how we all contribute or collude with a particular system. Because, I mean, I've had people say to me things like, what system? Because to some degree, there is a lack of understanding that these systems are in place, whether they are overt or insidious. And a lot of us can be consciously aware of certain things and unconsciously be contributing to that setup. So in terms of male entitlement or male power, and this is not women blaming by any means at all, but as a woman, I've had to look at how do I go along with that unconsciously, because I've been so conditioned to it.
We all have. It's why Me Too came as such a massive shock to so many men, whereas every woman I know went, duh, obviously. Yeah. And to take it even further, I mean, I think of I've been reading about the suffragettes a lot lately, and I'm staggered by how unpopular they were with women of their own class and era. It's facilitated by that gaslighting or that astroturfing or the grooming that you describe. Women think that they're safer when they've got a powerful man to protect them. So they go along with this stuff, and you end up seeing women wearing T-shirts during the last American presidential campaign inviting Donald Trump to sexually assault them.
And because we all, to some degree, are frightened of change, and we're all frightened that if the status quo gets changed, our piece of the pie is going to get taken away. So I might as well have the small piece of pie I have, because God forbid someone else is going to come along and take it away from me.
And that's what works so well politically, is that immigrant is trying to take your biscuits. It's a black man in the White House. Women have got big jobs. Gay people don't get lampooned in public anymore or traced out of town or thrown out of their own homes. And all of these advances for these people, that means you are in retreat. It means you are being... it doesn't. There's plenty of room for all of us at top table. Just build a bigger table. But if you are a far-right politician, if you are a fascist or a racist or a scumbag, and you can whisper in the ear of somebody who's maybe a little bit cross or a little bit angry, a little bit dispossessed, or even maybe a little bit racist, you just whisper in their ear, they're talking foreign on trains. They're talking foreign on trains. I don't want to live next door to some Romanians. Here's a big poster saying breaking point. It works, and they know exactly what they're doing. Okay, thank you. Stephen is in Barnet. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I've got a few points. I think, firstly, in terms of moral stances, public policy, we shouldn't base our positions on whether some of the people that agree or indeed disagree with us turn out to be hypocrites. I think that's irrelevant to the moral argument.
Well, no, it isn't, is it? Because the first thing you can do under any moral code is live by it.
No, but the fact that these people don't live up to their own professed judgment doesn't mean that their reasoning in coming to that position is necessarily wrong.
Yes, it does.
I just think that's... I think, for somewhat from a religious point of view, and this comes to my second point, I think
So you're endorsing the idea of do as I say, not as I do, which is pretty much the textbook definition of hypocrisy.
No, I'm not endorsing that at all. I think you've misunderstood me.
Probably.
What I mean is that the fact that some people in their personal lives end up taking an action. We all have, I'm a religious person. You go to church. You've had a religious upbringing. I understand that, all of us sin. All of us do wrong things. And sometimes, part of that is, in the case of these...
well, then shut up and sit down and don't tell other people how they have to live. Deal with the mote in your own eye instead of the plank in your own eye instead of the mote in someone else's.
Well, I mean, okay, I can agree with you on that, but I'm just talking here. I wasn't trying to address...
You are. I mean, I don't know whether you like it or not, but you are endorsing the do as I say, not as I do school of thought. Because the minute you do differently from how you're telling other people to behave, you become somebody who doesn't deserve to be listened to in the public space.
No, but I'm saying I don't disagree with you on that particular point. But I'm saying that in terms of how I then respond, should I change my moral position because someone else...
Oh, no. As long as you're living by your own moral code, then other people's transgressions are irrelevant.
That was the point I was trying to make.
Good.
So now we
got there in the end.
Other. Okay. So
and it's time for the news. No, it really is, but I'll give you another 40 seconds.
Okay, so second point is, from a religious point of view, is I think the intersect of the value series is not necessarily misogynistic or racist or this. Okay. It's a religious view that our bodies don't belong to us, whereas if you take Western medicine, one of the founding principles is that of bodily autonomy. And I think that's where a lot of this...
so who do our bodies belong to?
Well, I mean, from a religious perspective, and as a religious person, I believe that my body is a gift from God that accompanies my soul through life.
And it would be a little bit more complicated to sustain that position if you were pregnant with a pregnancy you didn't want.
Well, I mean, I think this is, again, it comes down then to a
But
question.
as a man, you're not allowed to hold a view on what women can and can't do with their bodies, are you, under your own analysis?
But it's got nothing to do with my gender.
Of course it does. You can't get pregnant.
Well, no, I can't get pregnant, but what I'm saying is there might be other examples where...
Well, I'm not talking about other examples. We're talking about this. As a man, you can't get pregnant. Your view on pregnancy is therefore close to worthless, unless you're an Alabama senator in which you can outlaw
you have to be
abortion.
A robber to have a view on whether robbery is immoral?
No, of course you don't have to be a robber to have a view on whether robbery is immoral. But you have to be able to get pregnant to have a view about pregnancy that's as important as someone who can get pregnant.
I mean... I just think I disagree with you on that point.
And that's because you're, by your own description, you're very religious.
Well, again,
that's fine. I respect that. Up until the point you start telling other people how they have to live their lives, whether they're religious or not, or that woman over there, whether she can have an abortion or not, because of your religious beliefs. Mate, I was raised that way. I've got nothing but sympathy for you. And when the blinkers come off, it's an incredibly liberating experience. I did listen. Can only work with the calls we get. I'd much rather have had a woman putting forward the religious basis for her not being allowed to have an abortion. As it is, we ended up with a man. So thank you to Stephen for that. But I'm afraid it butters absolutely no parsnips with me. The line, that's a good story, actually, which I heard Nick covering earlier that we haven't had time to look at today, about attempting to define Islamophobia. And it's really interesting how difficult it can be to find moral consistency, because some people who are absolutely adamant that you should be able to mock the Prophet Muhammad in cartoons. I remember many moons ago, there was a stage show, a theatre show called Jerry Springer the Opera, and the suggestion in that, and I think the exact line was, Jesus was a little bit gay. And there were calls from people in my industry to shut that down on the grounds of blasphemy. The kind of person who was calling for Jerry Springer the Opera to be shut down on the grounds of blasphemy, oddly, is also the kind of person that thinks you should be allowed to mock other religions freely, because not to do so would somehow undermine your freedoms and your freedom of speech. I'm in favour of equal opportunities mockery, but obviously if you run the risk of getting your head blown off by a fundamentalist terrorist after publishing cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, you're going to think a lot longer or harder about that than you are about mocking other religions. I don't think there's any hypocrisy involved in that. My monastic boarding school still had Life of Brian banned in 1988. Banned, properly banned, as in it was a suspendable offence if you were found in possession of a VHS copy of that film. So it is almost always the case that a religious extremist today is doing exactly what a religious extremist from a different religion did yesterday. Have a look at the Reformation, have a look at the Spanish Inquisition, and have a look at the commonality on issues like abortion. Fundamentalist Christian evangelicals, fundamentalist Islamist radicals, Taliban, call them what you will, have a very, very similar attitude. It's all about power for men over women. That's why women should not have control over their own bodies. That's my view, anyway. And it's right. 12:38 is the time. Leslie's in Enfield. Leslie, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. Well,
Hello,
I'm nearly
Leslie.
70. When I was 16 years
How
old...
nearly... Are you 69 and a half? 69 and 3/4?
69 and a half.
69 and a half. Carry on, Leslie.
Anyway, when I was 16, I had a baby. I wasn't married.
Yes.
It was, it wasn't it was a choice relationship. Anyway, but I had this baby at 16. Abortion was not available. And I went to a mother and baby home, where you went in 6 weeks before the baby was born, stayed for 6 weeks afterwards,
I think I was born in exactly those circumstances, but in a Catholic mother and baby home.
This was a Church of England one. Anyway, there were baby farms and the babies were adopted. But the girls in there were, I was lucky, I had a sporty family, kept my baby, came out, and that was lovely.
Blimey, that must have been rare. But did you marry the baby's dad, or did the family help you raise your baby?
My family helped me raise the baby.
Gosh, you were different, and in my mind, very, very lucky then.
Oh, gosh, I was. Yeah. I was so lucky because the other girls, without exception, had their babies adopted. Apart from one girl, she was 12 years old, had been raped by her foster father. The baby was born blind and nobody would adopt it. And she'd been there for 12 months when I arrived and was still there when I left.
I would remind people that the current darling of the Conservative Party, Jacob Rees-Mogg, would be in favour of that 12-year-old being forced to go through with that pregnancy. But carry on, Leslie.
Utterly traumatised. There were girls from other countries sent over to have their babies adopted and go back as if nothing had happened.
Yes.
The impact on these, and they were girls and young women,
of course,
was absolutely horrendous. There were about 16 of us all, and the trauma was unbelievable. And I sort of then went on and, believed in women's liberation and progress and so on.
Yes.
About 2 years ago, I heard a story on the news about two young people in America, it was, and they were 15 and 16 respectively. They hadn't been able to tell anybody about her being pregnant, and she'd given birth on her own with a boyfriend. They put the baby in the dumpster. The baby died. They were charged with murder. And I just sat down and wept. I thought we'd come so much further than that.
Yeah.
And it has to be a holistic approach.
Depends what we mean by we, doesn't it, I suppose? Because if you're talking about Anglicans and to a lesser extent Catholics, but actually almost to it. No, actually also Catholics, then the we in this context works. But if you're talking about people from other religions, other cultural backgrounds who haven't yet had this moment of enlightenment, then they are also we, Leslie. I'm with you on that. They are also we.
I mean, we, the entire human race.
I know you do.
Yes. But as I say, I thought sort of in the
West.
the
stigma, though. They want to bring stigma back. Stigma and shame are their weapons, aren't they? The stigma and shame are the weapons with which they achieve power.
Yeah. And, do they know what they're playing with? Really.
Well, here's this is going to ruin your day. There's currently 300 anti-abortion bills awaiting judgment in 36 different states, including one in Georgia that would allow authorities to investigate women who miscarry.
Oh, my goodness.
And there's one in Texas that would allow capital punishment for those who receive or perform an abortion. So that's sanctity of human life right there. Let's kill the doctor and the mum.
Oh, that's just... I can't tell you how sad that makes me feel.
No, me too. And that is what happens when you take the lid off, isn't it? This stuff, this notion of supremacy and power and all of those things. Did you...
but of course the fetus has rights, yes. And it is enshrined in our abortion legislation.
Yes, but it's arbitrary. And there's no way you're never going to win the argument that it begins at X weeks and doesn't begin at X hours. You could talk about the viability of life outside the womb, but that changes with every passing year of scientific advancement and technology.
But No, you're only allowed to have an abortion when two doctors have weighed up the negative impact on the mother versus the negative impact on the fetus. So that the fetus does have rights enshrined in legislation.
No, you're absolutely right. All I mentioned about it being arbitrary is that they are enshrined in legislation. Therefore, they can be unenshrined or changed or moved forward or moved backwards. Actually, I'm not going to have time for any more calls because I want to ask Leslie at least one more question. It must have been tough being a teenage single mum 69 and a half years ago. No, not 69 and a half years ago. I beg your pardon. Let me get the sum right. 56 and a half years ago or there. 53 and a half years ago. We got there in the end.
Yeah.
What was it like?
Well, yes. No, of course it was tough. But I did have a supportive family. A lot of those girls that I was in the home with, they didn't have that and they could not keep their babies, even if they wanted to.
Gosh.
And I think, a woman, and in this case, in some cases girls, have an absolute right to decide, if they can go forward and support a child.
Should just be a given. And for a brief period in both of our lives, Leslie, it felt like it was, didn't it? It felt like it was just a given. And now here we are contemplating a full-speed reverse to medieval values.
Oh, I know. It's just a tragedy.
Well, this will cheer you up. It's PMQ's next.
And I believe Jeremy's going to sing for us.
We shall see. I hope I haven't over-egged that particular pudding. Happy birthday, an early happy birthday for your looming 70th in 6 months' time. Thank you, Leslie. Julia says, I'm in favour of abortion, always have been. I'm also against circumcision, but can I not have an opinion on the latter because I'm a woman? Of course you can have an opinion. You just don't get to tell a man who wants one that he's not allowed to have one. You silly sausage, if you pardon the pun.